Hello, welcome to our physiology course. Today we will discuss about physiology of oral sensation. We know that our bodies are frequently tasked with receiving, integrating, and interpreting environmental inputs that provide information about our internal and external environments. To do these things, sensory organs are indispensable, and our sensory organ is glued. Visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile system. The tissues of mouth must be sensitive to a variety of stimuli from the food and the substances that are not food. When we eat food, the tissues of mouth can be sensitive to the structures, the taste, temperatures, and chemical agents of the foods. And other activity of oral cavity such as the chewing, swallowing, and speaking require accurate information from periphery about somatic sensation so that the mouth and face area are rich of sensory distribution. There are two main types of sensations in the mouth area. There are the general sensation, or it also called somatic sensation or somatosensory. And the second one is the taste and olfactory. This is a special sensation. The general sensation include the mechanosensation, thermosensation, and sensation. After receiving the stimuli, the orofacial somatosensory informations are conveyed to the central nervous system, mainly through 5 cranial nerves. It is also called trigeminal nerves, due to 3 branches of nerves from V1 to V3. In addition, there are other nerves such as nerve 7, or it also called the facial nerves, nerve 9, and nerve 10, and the cervical spinal nerve from C1 to C3. The taste informations are transmitted by the first afferent nerves to the nerve 7, 9, and 10 to the central nervous system. As mentioned above, the information about somatic sensation in the mouth include the mechanosensation, thermosensation, and sensation. From the receptor are conveyed by the trigeminal somatosensory system to the central nervous system at the thalamus. So that now we will discuss about mechanosensation. The objectives of this part that we have to present the functions of mechanoreceptors in the human mouth and face, list the types of mechanoreceptors in the skin and mucosa of the mouth and face, and state their response characteristics to stimuli. Explain the role of mechanoreceptors in the skin and oral mucosa in speech, chewing, and tongue activity. Present the definition, functions, and response characteristics of the mechanoreceptors in the periodontal tissue. And you also have to state 3 properties of mechanoreceptors in periodontal tissue. State 4 roles of mechanoreceptors in the periodontal tissue for jaw movement control. So there are 3 main contents of this part. The first one is the mechanoreceptors in human orofacial skin and oral mucosa. The second one is the signals of mechanoreceptors in the movement of orofacial region, speak, chewing, tongue movements. And the third one is the mechanoreceptors in periodontal tissue. As you have learned that the chewing, speaking, and facial expression are among the most complex human motor behaviors. To be able to speak fluently, it is required to have a good coordination of many muscles. And to be able to choose The jaw must use great force in many suitable directions to grip the target first, while ensuring that the lips, cheeks, and tongue are not bitten. This is also called mutual protection of masticatory system. And about the facial expression, the activity of facial muscles helps express a variety of emotion state on the facial expression, so that to be able to perform those functions requires the coordination of many muscles to work correctly and in a sequence. And of course, to control all these activities, the brain is required to constantly collect, evaluate, process information about the state of peripheral tissue, such as the jaw, tongue, lips, cheeks, teeth, etc., which are provided by mechanoreceptors. So, what is mechanoreceptors? The orofacial mechanoreceptor provide the information about the tension of tissues, the touch, the vibration, and the deformation of tissue when the muscles function. And the mechanoreceptors in the facial skin and oral mucosa are ruffinic end organs, muscular corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscle, mucous disc, mechano-receiving free nerve endings. The vermilion tip and tongue especially dance with the mechanoreceptors. The dense sensory distribution in orofacial regions reflect the large size of nerve field and the large representative area of primary somatosensory cortex. As you see in the figure here, there are a large representative sensory area in the somatosensory cortex. The following things may be something that you don't know, that the ability to perceive delicately of the tongue not only identify root areas of the tooth surfaces and restoration, but also detect small objects better than the finger. The characteristics of mechanoreceptors in the orofacial skin and mucosa are different, depending on each region. For example, the facial skin, vermilion, cheeks, and the deep part of tongues are slow adapting. Because the receptor of these parts are mucotis, ruffinic ending, muscle spider in tongue muscle, and these receptors are small, well-defined receptor fields, like the skin of hands and arms. In the opposite way, the shallow part of tongue is fast adapting. Because the receptor of this part are muscular corpuscles, Pacinian corpuscles. So maybe because they are very small and well-defined receptor fields, so that it looks like the tip of finger. Those are the reasons that help the tongue detect small objects better than the finger. So, after stimulus receiving, how the receptor work? Firstly, we have to know about the receptive field. Receptive field is the particular region of the sensory space. For example, the body surface space inside the ear, in which a stimulus is trigger of the fire of that neuron. This is special area of sensory space where a stimulus will evoke transmission of that neuron. And the second one that you have to know that the smaller of receptor field, the more subtle to respond to the stimulus. The mechanoreceptor in the face, lip, and oral mucosa discharge instantly when the tissue is touched. which will transmit the contact information to the brain. Is the receptor. The tissue distortion or lift jaw movement will transmit detailed information about the sequence of muscle action on the soft tissue. These are important to control the facial muscles. It also role at the proprioceptor. The signal of mechanoreceptor in the movement of oral facial regions depends on the activities such as speech, chewing, and tongue movement. But when we speak, unlike skeletal muscles, the facial muscles do not have proprioceptors as muscle spindles or Golgi tendon organs. However, they ingest directly to the soft tissues of the face so that they can deform the skin when they contract in very specific patterns during speech. It means tissue tension during speaking. These are meaningfully explained by central nervous system to control of facial muscle when speaking for smooth, clear speaking. The signal from the periphery will provide the information about the position and movement of tissue, help central nerve system to adjust the appropriate movement in speech, so that this successful success to record in memory, and we can do it automatically. For example, when we are pronouncing appa, this must three phases happen. Mouth opening, then the lip close, then the pull in of intraoral air pressure and lip open movement for the p release sound, right? Upper, open the mouth, and lip close, and then p release the sound. How's about chewing? While we are chewing, the facial skin and oral mucosa are also deformed by the action of jaw muscles. The different mechanoreceptors respond preferentially in different movements, and these signals are important to contributing to chewing control. When we eat, all sensory organs are involved in receiving sensations from the food. The vision helps observe the color and shape of food. Olfactory sense sees the smell. Auditory feels the sound when the food is broken. The tactile or the touch helps feel the density of food. And finally, the gustatory helps to feel the taste and temperatures of food. All of these stimuli are sent by the receptor and transmitted along the nerves to the central nervous system for analysis and decision making regarding the muscle activities when participating in process of biting, tearing, chewing, and cleaning the food. The first step when you want to eat the food is biting food. When the anterior comes into contact with the food, the mechanoreceptor in the periodontal ligament will sense to the densities of food, like soft, chewy, or hot or super hot food, and transmit to the central nervous system. The brain analyzes and then decides to perform more or less muscle contractions depending on the densities of food. This is how when we eat. And of course, to perform the functions of chewing speaking, it requires coordination of tongue movement. There are many receptors in the tongue to perform the function of tongue, include the receptors located on the surface of tongue and receptors located deep in the tongue muscles. The first one is the receptors in the superficial layer of tongue, which are respond when the tongue comes into contact with other structures or objects in the mouth. Most of them respond quickly. This is a common feature of highly sensitive structures like the finger and it is called broad function or esteroceptors. Secondly, the receptors deep in the tongue muscle will respond the information about tongue movement. All of the receptors respond slowly and provide information about the position and movement of tongue. This is also called the proprioceptors. And another type of receptor is mechanoreceptors in periodontal tissue. The mechanoreceptors are receptors located in the periodontal ligament that are sensitive to small force below 1 Newton applied to tooth. The function of these receptors are perceiving the external forces on the teeth and establishing sensory reflexes such as the opening reflex or chewing reflex. The mechanoreceptors in the periodontal tissue include two main types. The first one is the receptors of slow adapting type. They are muscardic, roughly ending. This action potential current is continuous while the stimuli is maintained. It means they are still in contact with teeth. These type of mechanoreceptors in periodontal tissue help to recognize an object which is held between teeth. And the second receptor are fast adapting type. They are Meissner and Pacinian corpuscles. They get the sharp excitation when there is vibration due to rubbing of the objects on teeth. It's also called the vibration. And they are rapid re-excitation with a new stimulus. All of them will evaluate the textures of objects. Next is the characteristics of the periodontal mechanoreceptors, which is shown in this graph. This is the mechanoreceptor force response curve at the anterior teeth and posterior teeth. It's easy to observe that both anterior teeth and posterior teeth are established between 0 and 1 Newton. So the periodontal mechanoreceptors are low threshold mechanoreceptors. They mean the average threshold of perceptual force below 1 Newton, specific to each region that the incisor and canine are below 1 Newton. For the second premolar and first molar, the threshold of perceptual force is more than 1 Newton. And in this graph, you can see that the anterior teeth with the dark light and posterior teeth with the gray light. According to this graph, the anterior teeth are more sensitive to force compared to posterior teeth, and their response also tends to saturate. In the graph, the curve of both anterior teeth and posterior teeth are almost horizontal with force above the limit. They mean the mechanoreceptors are high sensitive to force below 1 Newton, and they can reach the highest speed range of force above the limit. However, there is a small number of receptors, about 20%, do not tend to be saturated, and the stimulus response correlation is almost straight line, that they also effectively respond to forces above the limit. The receptor field of mechanoreceptor in the periodontal tissue usually exists one-third. During the chewing, the afferent fibers of the tooth subjected directly to stress is activated, but also the afferent fibers of the adjacent teeth are activated with a greatly reduced response. For example, in this case, the main load will apply on the tooth. This means a half of receptors of one tooth respond to the loads on the adjacent tooth groups. For example, in this case, you can see that about 2 to 2 or 4 teeth. However, the central nervous system can accurately localize the force placed on the tooth-carrying receptor. So they are called the overlap of receptor fields in the periphery, and they help to improve their spatial localization. Preferred fork direction of mechanoreceptor is different between anterior and posterior teeth. The preferred direction of receptor in anterior and premolar teeth is contributed quite evenly around the tooth circumference, so that the anterior teeth act as a precision cutting tool. However, the posterior teeth you can see in this picture, the clear preferred fork direction of receptor in posterior teeth is distal lingual direction, so that they encode information about the normal forces acting on the posterior teeth during chewing. This is a normal direction when chewing. So the role of periodontal tissues mechanoreceptors, that the number of mechanoreceptors of periodontal tissue in the anterior teeth is higher than posterior teeth, and they are also more sensitive to force than posterior teeth. And as mentioned above, the priority force direction of anterior teeth is multidirectional. So they are supposed to be the third hand or a precision cutting tool. This is similar to the dense sensory distribution in the finger. The mechanoreceptors of periodontal tissue are also provide information about the level, direction, and point of applied force that help to hold and manipulate food between the teeth. So when they are lack of afferent information about periodontal tissues, like in denture resting on the mucosa or crown on implant, they can cause a significant disturbance in precise control of force level and direction. The mechanoreceptors of periodontal tissues also contribute to controlling the operation of three-dimensional mandible in space. If these receptors are lost, control of jaw movement in space is also affected. The receptor in periodontal tissue also play an important role in detecting objects between teeth. They have an ability to identify mental foil thickness between the natural upper and lower teeth, only 20 micrometers. In the complete denture resting on mucosa is also more sensitive, more than 7 to 8 times, and with full arch implants prosthesis is more than 3 to 5 times. The sense of touch will increase over time. So in this case, the loss of mechanoreceptors in periodontal tissue will decrease the abilities of perceiving occlusal interferences as well as the controlling force level and direction. And the result of them is the trauma from the occlusion. The second topic of our today's lesson is about the thermosensation. The content of this topic includes the physiology of thermosensation, temperature perception, and temperature and food. The first one, we will discuss about the physiology of thermosensation. The normal temperature as rate of our facial skin is about 33 to 34 Celsius degree, and it's a little bit higher in the mouth and tongue. So when the mouth is closed, the tissue are warmer, And when the food is brought into contact with tissues in the mouth or face, the temperature energy will be transferred between tooth and tissues so that it will increase or decrease the temperature of the tissue. If the temperature changes are enough to magnitude and speed stimulate the thermoreceptors, which is fiber-free nerve ending of nerve fiber. So the transfer of energy to the receptors will depend on the epithelial layer thickness and the degree of keratinization, as well as the amount of the saliva. There are three types of receptors respond to temperature changes. The first one is the warm receptors. The second one is the cold receptors. And the last one is nociceptors, which is only elicited by nauseous or damaging range above 45 Celsius degree and below 12 Celsius degree. The thermoreceptors in the orofacial area have receptor channels that respond to thermal energy to varying degrees. This is called the transient receptor potential channels. These channels control the movement of ions across the cell membrane. When the potential depolarization of the receptor higher thresholds of stimulation, it will initiate action potentials and it will cause an electrical signal transmitted to the brain. This figure shows the transient receptor potential channel that the blue line is the range of cold temperature and red line is the range to ramp temperatures. The thermotransient receptor potential channels respond to stimulus of thermal energy changes and specific chemical substances. For example, the capsaicin is in hot peppers and is perceived as hot, even though there is no transfer of heat. And it resembles a harmful temperature stimulus above 45 Celsius degree. And it can decrease the thresholds of hot perception. Another chemical substance in methane is similar to the temperature stimulus below 26 Celsius degree, and it will increase the sensitivity to cold. In any given region, there are 10 to 15 times more cold receptors than hot receptors, and the hot and cold fibers discharge strongly with a change in temperature, then adapt to the new steady state. Now we move to the perception of temperature. When the temperature in our environment changes compared to the normal threshold, below 29 Celsius degree or above 37 Celsius degree, the corresponding thermoreceptors will be stimulated to transmit information about the central nervous system and allow sensation to be felt hot or cold or very hot or very cold, depend on the range of temperature. So when we eat or drink, the temperatures of food and drink is very important. So now we will discuss about the temperatures and food. For example, when you drink coffee, it is mostly preferred either hot or cold, but with ice cream, it prefers cold. Cookies must at room temperature, etc. So, due to the change of their flavor and the way of food will proceed with the changing temperature at melting or smoothness. Our lesson ends here, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section, or you can ask me directly in the offline class. Thank you and see you next time.